Are you somebody who's a wounded healer? You had a pretty fucked up childhood, and all your friends and even strangers seem to always come to you to confide their deepest, darkest traumas and problems to? Are you somebody who had a mysterious long-term illness that modern medicine couldn't solve, or you've had various near-death or out-of-body experiences? Do you seem to be very spiritually connected, whether it's through heightened intuition, paranormal experiences that no one can explain, or being very sensitive to other people's energies? If this sounds like you, then congratulations. You may be a shaman in an era where the Kardashians are apparently a thing, and some people even look up to them as role models. So what are shamans? Shamans are those that traverse different planes to bring about wisdom and healing into our physical reality for the people around them and their communities, okay? For tens of thousands of years, shamans were those who were the spiritual leaders and healers in their respective villages and tribes. Now, in ancient times, despite continents being gridlocked and having no contact with one another, anthropologist Michael Harner discovered that shamans basically had similar practices across different continents, meaning there was an innate wisdom to what they were doing. They were tapping into something similar, okay? Now, shaman is a relatively new term used by mainstream Western society to describe this modern medicine man, essentially, right? But this has been around for tens of thousands of years, okay? Now, the word shaman is from the Tungus tribe in Siberia, and it basically means one who sees in the dark, right? Because shamans are often entering into transcendental states and exploring non-ordinary realities. And also, yeah, the bridge between two different worlds, all right? Now, shamans are not woo-woo. They are not these people that are always off in Jupiter. In fact, shamans back in ancient times or within these tribal societies were those who mastered both the spiritual and physical planes, right? It's weird in the sense that oftentimes in these villages and tribes, it was very normal for people to go to a shaman before a doctor to handle their illness, right? Shamans were multifaceted. Shamans have just been equated with spirituality in our society because in Western culture, our disease is not being connected to spirit, and shamans essentially fill that gap for us. Now, we are talking about shamanic callings, okay? Because shamans are born. It is believed that people incarnate to be a shaman, to be this medicine man, to be this healer, right? That traverses these different planes of reality. And if this person has a shamanic calling, that is what they are going to do. And if they don't answer that calling, the soul will just leave. Essentially, if you do not answer your shamanic calling, you will die. Now, shamans have very difficult initiatory processes. In ancient times, the tribes chose or were able to identify the person who was a shaman either due to that person having mental breakdowns and hearing voices, or that person was struck by lightning, okay? It's not a fun time. Now, for the last, I'd say, 1,000 years, shamans have basically been away from mainstream society. But now they're coming back. And it is likely because we are so disconnected from the self. We are so disconnected from spirit that there needs to be this balancing. That we are now seeing these older souls who have this past as medicine men and women making a comeback. And if you have a calling, you have to answer it. So, what are the signs that you have a shamanic calling? What are the signs that you incarnated here to be this modern day healer? Well, we talked about it. You're a wounded healer. You have a history of childhood trauma. People come to you, right? Always to solve their problems, to just spill out what they're going through, right? And you actually feel this innate calling to ease the suffering in the world, to ease the suffering of humanity. When you see someone in pain, you know that it's your job to help them through it, even though it's not. We need to talk about boundaries. There's also shamanic illness and or near-death experiences. When you have, in all these ancient tribal societies, it was normal for the person with a shamanic calling to go through this mysterious long-term illness, right, that they had to work through on their own. It's an energetic illness more so than anything else, which is why modern medicine has such a difficult time or problem solving these. So if you're someone who's been diagnosed with like chronic Lyme disease, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, it may be this shamanic illness, this shamanic initiatory process that you have to work through to figure out on your own why your bodies begin to shut down. And it's through this process that you will be taken to these alternative forms of medicine so you can figure out how to heal yourself and so you can heal others. Myself, I went through a 4-year illness where I was bedridden, no one could figure it out. I had to drink jugs of plants that were grounded up from Africa to finally heal myself and do energy healing and all this other weird stuff. I was very atheist at the time. I would have never found my way to these modalities had it not been for this mysterious illness that modern medicine, quite frankly, could not figure out. Also, shamans will go through near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences. This is a death, a way of beginning to perceive that there are all these different realities, right? Sometimes people go through a near-death experience and enter into these other planes of reality. There's also narcissistic abuse. This is a modernized path now for shamans, and for many of them, they grow up in narcissistic families or they enter into a relationship with a partner who has severe narcissism, okay? Why is that? Well, shamans are not all light. As we talked about, shamans are those who see in the dark. And to become a modern medicine man, modern medicine woman, we have to understand the darker aspects of humanity. Also, many shamans will incarnate into really messed up families that are carrying a lot of ancestral trauma or ancestral karma, and they want to take on all that karmic weight and transmute it and get it out of the collective. You're also spiritually gifted. From a young age, you just felt this deeper connection to spirit, right? You have heightened intuition. You've had experiences with premonitions that end up coming true. You're sensitive to energy. You feel energy off other people. You may be even able to see colors and tints of vibrating off other people. You know, the human aura. There's just basically, you have heightened abilities, right? Mental breakdowns. Our society looks at mental illness very differently than ancient tribal societies look at it. Ancient tribal societies did not see mental breakdowns as this negative thing that always needed to be cured or healed, right? In fact, it was usually just a recognition of the dissolving of the ego. Because when you have a shamanic calling, to access these other planes of reality, we have to experience multiple deaths. We have to experience multiple deaths of the self. So when the perceived self begins to die, it's very normal to have nervous or mental breakdowns, even panic attacks, right? And so our mental health system will say, oh, this person's crazy. And maybe there is an underlying mental health issue there, right? That's very valid, that we need medication for, okay? But sometimes people who have a shamanic calling are misdiagnosed with a mental illness, right? This is part of their initiatory process. There's just a breaking down of egoic structures that they have to go through. And it's very important to identify this and recognize if this is just a shamanic death they're going through and not necessarily a mental health crisis. Also, in ancient tribal societies, they would identify shamans by those who heard voices. Now, sometimes those who hear voices shouldn't be hearing them. But you may have to accept there are these different planes of reality, and those who are hearing voices, and the voices are telling them about love and forgiveness, or giving them incredibly wise insight that this person would not have access to otherwise. This may be someone who is a little bit spiritually in tune and has a shamanic calling. Last but not least, you may have a shamanic calling if you are wise beyond your years, right? You have always felt out of place in the society. You have always seen through the illusions of Western culture, okay? You feel drawn to mythology, to like ancient stories, okay? Ancient wisdom, essentially. Those around you see you or view you as an old soul. Even for as young as you are, you just have this innate wisdom that seems to belie how old you are, right? So, If we have all these signs, what does that mean for us? For me, I was headed to law school when I discovered that I may have had a shamanic calling, and I tried to run from it as hard as I could, but the universe kept slingshotting me back into this path no matter what I did. So you have to answer the calling, and you have to continue to build your connection with spirit. Spirit will continue to give you signs and synchronicities that point you to your path and guide you to where you're supposed to go. And it is through building this connection, through meditation, through being out in nature, right? Through just opening up that crown, that you begin to understand and just become in flow and go where you're supposed to be. You also have to begin to explore and find the form of healing that resonates with you the most. Shamans heal in many different ways, and if you have a shamanic calling, each one has a different modality or a different type of medicine that they might be called to work with, okay? Now, I have clients with shamanic callings, and some feel deep connections to work with ayahuasca or kambo or any of these other plant medicines. For myself, that's not the case. I work more with energy healing and shamanic soul retrievals, right? Some people work with sound healing. Okay, there are these different forms of healing, and you have to find the one that you feel a natural calling towards and then work with that type of modality. You also have to find a mentor or guide. I've had two main mentors throughout my process, okay? And they came right when I began exploring this stuff, and they fell right in my lap, all right? So it is about opening that container for that person to come into your life. You do likely need someone, don't put them on a pedestal, but someone who is already has been on this journey, who is working within the modalities that you feel resonance with, to help guide you and show you the way and help you harness your abilities. Because until you do, you can either resist them or suppress them or feel very much out of control with them, which is what I was going through. It was not fun being in a law school class, feeling the energy off 100 people in my lecture and seeing an orange aura around my professor. All right, can't believe I just admitted that. Begin learning and reading more about modern shamanism. So through there are great authors. There's anthropologist Michael Harner, there's Sandra Ingerman, there's Itzhak Berry, who's very much in terms of South American shamanism, and there is Alberto Villota. Probably didn't pronounce that correctly, I'm sorry. These authors have a lot of wisdom about the modern form of shamanism, how shamanism has kind of been acclimated to our mainstream Western society, all right, because we don't necessarily live in like tribal cultures anymore. Also, continue to learn more about spirituality and these different planes and how they intersect with ours. There's tons of different books, tons of different videos that you can watch that help guide your process. Remember, this is about accessing your intuition and allowing this inner self to guide you to the information that you need to learn. Most importantly, though, to be a shaman, you must heal yourself. You are not going to be effective at what you do if you don't dive into healing your deeper traumas that have come about from your initiatory process and healing your toxic shame. Shamanism is about having integrity. You are a conduit for spirit. If you assert your own will or your own ego onto these healings, you can create a lot of damage for yourself and for the other person as well. And so it is through healing our toxic shame, through healing our traumas, not resisting this process, that we begin to become a vessel for spirit to work through in a way where we're not diluting or distorting the healing that's supposed to take place. All right, that's my video about shamanic callings. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you gained this insight. Please make sure to subscribe, and I look forward to you watching more.